This is how we move our industry forward. Initially, the reaction is, you're talking about tooling. How is tooling culture? Well, tooling helps define culture. Now you've got like more change on top, or better yet, oh, this one I've done 1,000 times, which is, my name is Dylan, and I am co-founder and CEO of a company called Sleuth. And this talk is about delegating engineering toil to the robots. So, it's been a long day. You've all had a conference session. I want you to visualize a beautiful and perfect world, and a world where developers get to spend their time on producing engineering value, right? Not wasting their time, not working on busy work, not doing these things, having the focus time that they need to actually ship the things that are going to make a difference for your customers and your organization. Now, can this world exist? Perhaps, but there's this thing called toil. Now, generally speaking in the English language, toil means to work extremely hard or incessantly, to do exhausting physical labor. But more specifically, in our engineering world, in software engineering world, we mean something slightly different. What do we mean by developer experience toil? Well, this is the repetitive tasks that your dev team needs to do to get things done, right? They're repetitive tasks that aren't necessarily unimportant, but they are tasks that, again, you have to do over and over again. You have to do it correctly. And generally speaking, at some point, it's wasting your time. It's not giving your customers that end value. It's something that you likely can do without. And how do you know if you've got developer experience toil? There's a couple of categories. There's a couple of ways that you can ask these questions to understand if you do or don't. So, if our team always does X, Y, Z. In other words, like, I'm a developer, I need to remember to transition this issue into this bucket, and I need to remember when it goes out that I need to ping the PM and let him know this other thing. It's a manual task. I have to do it every time, but it's me. I have to do it. I have to change context, change flow. Manual steps in your workflow. Things like, I'm going to do a deploy, and at some point before I merge things into production, I should go figure out all the people that were involved in the change. I should find them, mention them in Slack, ask them, is this okay to do? That's a manual step. That's context switching. It's toil. I have to do it over and over and over again. And another giant category is like syncing state between different systems. So again, like, your Jira backlog, the place that is like never in touch with reality, right? Because people forget to transition state, or, you got to go into Slack and mention people, or you got to update the wiki with your release notes, or whatever it is. You're pushing state from one place to the other. Are your customers getting benefit from that? Likely not. Are your developers getting frustrated? Likely so. All right. My argument is that automations remove toil. So when we talk about how we even just move our software industry forward, it is through automation. Automation is this lovely, wonderful thing when we do something 20 times and we realize, hey, this is a repetitive task. We can delegate that off to robots. And that can be super exciting. Don't just take my word for it. I mean, we've got a timeline here of examples of automations just transforming our industry. So, circa 2001, automated unit and synthetic tests. I worked at Atlassian back in the day, and right around then, we were writing heaps and heaps of tests, but they were running on my laptop. They didn't necessarily gate my changes. We decided to move to automated execution of that, and that changed the game. Suddenly, we could run them in a consistent manner. We could, break them up and execute them. It really changed how we could work. Fast forward a little further in 2005, ephemeral infrastructure defined as code. Puppet Chef eventually evolved into things like Terraform. Again, like maybe even got rid of an entire role. I knew ops people whose job was to understand the drift between this server and that server, and new engineers who lost days of time debugging issues that were specific to a server. So you move to infrastructure as code, automate that, and suddenly we've changed the game again. And then fast forward a little further, the DevOps pipelines with no manual steps. I mean, huge game changer, right? DevOps revolution right there in a can. Being able to deploy and make it a non-event. This is how we move our industry forward. All right, so maybe I've convinced you that automations have a lot of potential for change. Let's talk about what the traits of good automations in relation to developer experience workflow look like? Because it's not just any old automation. I mean, obviously, if it's helping you, great, go for it. But I will argue that there are some very key characteristics that allow you to level things up. And I actually made one more point. If I go back to the slide here, I put these things in a sort of staircase because I think it's important to understand that the automations that we have developed continue to build upon each other. I would argue that today we can do far more exciting and powerful things for developer experience workflow because of all of these things that have come before. And it's truly now that we can start to unlock this higher level of automation. All right, so talking about traits, number one trait of a good developer experience automation is that it's going to help drive your culture. Now, I feel like when I've talked to people about this one, initially the reaction is, you're talking about tooling, how is tooling culture? Well, tooling helps define culture, right? It helps build these things like guardrails. It says, if we are going to always do a thing, it helps define how we work, because we agree as people that we're going to work in a certain way, and then the automation can enforce those norms. For very simple example, if I'm going to say there needs to be an issue key in the title of every pull request so that people have the context about why we're making a change. They have the context to understand for the review cycle and that sort of thing. That's an agreement amongst a developer team. And you can enforce that with an automation. And then rather than having somebody be the bad guy, you have basically automations being the bad guy. And it's not really a bad guy because you said, we want to do this, and it's there to remind you of these things. So a good automation enforces these norms, and it also allows you to try new things. So if you want to try something different, again, you can say, let's agree as a group, let's put in place some automation, and then the automation is there to support you and build that the layers that you're going to build upon as a team. Okay, next automation excellent trait is that automation should be low lift. Now, I love these little XKCD things because I think they got it super exactly right in all instances. As an engineer, I am guilty of having done this a million times, which is to say, I'm working on a problem. It's a problem to solve things for customer value. I realize, hey, I could add an automation here and make my life way better. And what I think is going to happen is I'm going to spend a little time on the automation, and then I'm really going to get into the flow and get to do things. What happens almost 9 times out of 10 is that I start working on the automation. It's far more complicated than I thought. It takes more time. I've run into a bug. It's some ongoing development. And now I have no time to actually do the real work behind the scenes. So you can imagine that's the world that every automation lives in. It's hard to make progress because you never quite know the depth of that automation. Whereas if you have low lift automations, you can treat them as an experiment and basically iterate on them a lot quicker. The other thing I would say too is that the comic on the left is also true, that sometimes there's things that you do, but it doesn't take a lot of time. It's just a context switch. And if you were to ask yourself, if this is going to take me a week to automate this, when am I going to get paid back for that? And the answer might be never. But you add 12 of those up, and they're going to add up over time. So if you can make your automation super low lift, you can get a lot of benefit, and you can start to attack some of those death by 1,000 paper cuts. Which leads me to the next topic. The idea of a low lift automation means that you can really do a paradigm shift. And this is honestly the crux of, I believe, the way that modern teams are working, is everybody is trying to achieve this idea of continuous improvement, continuous learning. And it's not rocket science to realize that, I mean, it's just straight up science, right? You need to be able to perform an experiment. You have a hypothesis, you run an experiment, you measure. If the hypothesis was wrong, you try again. But if your experiment is going to take forever, you're only going to get 1 or 2 shots at goal. But if you can do these things in a tight loop and you can really measure these things, you can continuously iterate towards a better and better process. So a good automation is an experiment. It's your team saying, what if we did X? And you're going to measure, and you're going to check it out, and you're going to try. Which, oh, actually, I thought there was a different slide coming. But another trait that I think you will find in this day and age that is huge is that you have to be able to use the tools that your teams are using already today in these automations. So if you think back to that slide where we had the stair step of how automations have sort of built upon each other over time. We're at this place now where we're all using these cloud-based tools, right? We're using some sort of Git repository with like, code review. We're using an issue tracker somewhere. We're using a CI/CD system. My guess would be that 90% of you are using some subset of these tools that are up on the screen right here. Now, what that means is if we want to make an impactful change to the way that your development teams are working, you need to be able to automate across all of this, because things start in Jira and then they move into a pull request and then they move into a production environment via CI/CD and then they move into PagerDuty when you've messed up. And you need to be able to talk to all of these systems to really take best practice workflows and implement them in your services. So let's talk about this in terms of a story. We talked about the traits of a good automation. Now, I have a number of different stories, but I like this one the best. So for our startup Sleuth, question. Is that right? Huh, okay. Well, maybe I meant to say 4 then. Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, telling a story about something that I think fulfills these categories. Now, we cheated a little bit in the sense that Sleuth is built to do a lot of these things and to basically bring the low lift side of this. But there's a number of different best practices that are out there in the world. One of these is to say, I'm going to make a change and I'm going to deploy that change to a pre-production environment. And I want to have a culture on my team of people identifying that their change has hit a pre-production environment, take a hot minute, do a smoke test, check that it works in that pre-production environment the way that we want it to before we're going to go ahead and merge that into a production environment, right? That's a reasonably common workflow, but you can imagine that that's a little difficult, right? We have to merge a thing. We have to know that CI/CD has deployed that to a specific environment. I need to know who it is that I need to mention. And then I need to hopefully collect that information in an environment where the people are working, so something like Slack. And then I need to trigger a CI/CD pipeline in some other system to promote things to production. A complicated automation, but you can see how that's going to drive reliability. It's going to drive accountability. It's going to promote my team doing smoke tests and those sorts of things. So a great example of taking all of those traits of an automation and building it into something that if we can adopt really quickly, we can understand how that impacts our flow. And it is something that really defines the culture of our team. It's holding up so many pillars of what we want to do. And in our case, actually, we used that as an experiment and we decided, we needed some nuance to that. We started with just straight up approvals. And then we said, if it's no big deal and it's a small change, after 10 minutes, if everything's okay, based off of the monitoring that's coming in from other systems, let's auto promote it, And then we went, oh, how about if we have a label on a pull request that's quick fix? It doesn't even stop at all. It just goes straight out, But because we could experiment with that automation and move really quickly, we could see how it would fit the flow that we were actually trying to attack ourselves. Okay, so that's a little bit about the why, the theoretical, how we should build automations to be really impactful. Let's talk a little bit about what teams are doing today. So the good news is you all have been doing these things for the last 10 or 15 years. So we have a ton of best practices out there and teams have adopted these things. And they tend to fall into a bunch of different buckets, 4 major buckets, basically guardrails, notifications, actions, and workflows. So let's walk through these and I'll tell you a little bit about what they mean and I'll give you an example of each. Okay, first off, guardrails. We were kind of talking about this a little bit before. Think of a guardrail as defining the boundary that your team agrees not to cross. So when you say, we always, or we never, for example, we never merge a pull request when we're in an incident, right? It's a reasonable thing. Lots of teams do that. Or we never open a pull request without an issue key, right? It's saying these are the guardrails. As an organization, as a team, we want to live up to a certain level of excellence and we won't cross these guardrails. These are types of automations that tend to be somewhat binary, right? They're going to either keep you from doing a thing or keep you doing a thing. And a great example of this is batch size, right? So for those who are familiar with the state of DevOps and DORA metrics, frequency is something that DevOps teams are trying to maximize. And the way that you maximize that is by driving your batch size down. You want to make the smallest amount of change that's going to have an impact, but like have a very small blast area, small blast radius in case something goes wrong. And as a team, you can agree, hey, we want to try and keep our batch size down. So you could add an automation that says a pull request can't have more than X change files, where X makes sense for your team. And you can see how that's going to say, as a group, if I've opened one that's too big, I need to split it. I need to go back. I need to just decide, how am I going to stay within these boundaries? And of course, with any of these sorts of things, maybe you've reformatted all of your code or run some sort of new linter, and you decide, this is the time where we're going to ignore this check. But again, that's the exception, not the rule. And that allows you to understand, how often are we exceeding this thing? Is this a rule that makes sense for our team? All right, next up's notifications. My guess is like 100% of you have a cell phone, so you probably know what notifications are. It brings visibility and attention to critical information, but critically, a good notification, just like on your phone, is context sensitive. It hits you at the right time. It hits you with the right information, and it's hitting the right people, right? Because I'm sure you all have notification fatigue. I'm one of those people who can't have 400 little red dots on my desktop. I know some of you can. I don't understand how you do it, but I can't. But you can use notifications not just to keep people aware of what's going on, but you can nudge behavior in the right direction. So one of the examples that I like is that a PR must not be open for more than a certain number of days, a draft PR, right? So if you want to have this culture of keeping your work flowing and making sure that you're not like spending a ton of time on like this dead branch or whatever, you can open a draft pull request and maybe you say, we don't want that to be open for more than 10 days. Well, the notification comes along and says, it's been 8 days for this thing being open. Perhaps you should either move this into real work so that you can start to get this reviewed and get this into your flow, or move on to something else and close this draft PR. You're nudging the behavior in the direction that you want people to move. Another great example of this is goals, where you say, I want everybody to be reviewing a PR that's been opened within say 10 hours or something like that. You identify and notify people at the 7-hour mark. Well, cool, I've got 3 hours to hit this thing that we all agreed on, and notify them again an hour before. You can nudge their behavior with a notification into the direction that you guys want people to be behaving. All right, actions. I don't know. I've heard people call this a different thing. I call it actions, but basically it's an if this, then that. So I detect a condition in some sort of system. I am confident enough in the signal of that condition that I want to change the state in another system as a result, right? So maybe I notice an incident in PagerDuty and I want to lock all of the pull requests in GitHub, right? It's a if this, then that. So again, attacking that thing from way back at the start of this talk, where we're saying one of the types of toil is keeping these systems in sync. So you can have something that you trust instigate changing that state rather than having somebody have to toil after that. One that is really, really popular with a lot of teams, we see people use this all the time, is the issue tracker stuff. So like I said, I don't think any of you would think I'm crazy to say that Jira is where things go to be out of sync. So you do a deploy, you get that deploy into your production environment, you automatically transition an issue into deploy to production. And why is this cool? Well, you got support engineers who are looking to get back to your customer and let them know that an issue is fixed. Great, they can see that the pull request was merged, but maybe at your organization that could be anywhere between 2 hours to 7 days before it actually gets into the customer's hands. So you're using this to keep work in sync so that you can have visibility so that you can better service your people. Finally, we have workflows. And workflows are just what you think. It's how you get work from concept all the way through to launch. It can be something really small that guides the way that you're doing work, or it can be something really big, like I was mentioning with the Slack-based approvals, right? It's a fairly complicated flow, but it's saying, this is how we work. This is the flow with which we are going to take work from one place to the other. Now, automations that tend to be workflow automations are often a combination of the other ones. Like it's saying, I'm going to have some sort of notification. I'm going to have some sort of if this then that. I'm going to have some guardrails that check the thing, and I'm going to bring it all together into a larger process that we can adopt that's going to help the flow of our team. One of the favorite ones that I have is that idea of auto-locking a project when your environment is in an incident. Now, I've done this with teams that I've run for probably 10 years or something like that, but I've done it in ways that were inconsistent and not super effective, right? Like you have the SRE team say, hey, I'm going to throw a Slack notification in there and be like, everybody, don't deploy. We're in the middle of a thing, and well, what is the first thing that a developer does? Is I didn't read Slack and I hit merge, right? Now you've got like more change on top, or better yet, oh, this one I've done 1,000 times, which is, you think, oh, everything's on fire. It's like all the CPUs are at like 90%. It's a total mess. We need to get a handle on this. And somebody does a deploy and like nukes your old infrastructure and spins up new infrastructure. Now it's not 90%. It's like 160%, and it's really on fire. Now it's like hard down, right? So the cost of not doing this right every time and getting it into a place where developers live is high, So being able to take this and say, I'm going to use my PagerDuty as the source of truth for nastiness. I am going to put a merge block in GitHub so that developers, where they live, they're going to go in there and they're going to try and click that button and it's going to say no, right? And yeah, I'm going to add some notifications in there as well. And then when the thing gets resolved, I'm going to make it all better, right? And that's just how we work. So it's a good example of how you take a somewhat simple situation, bring together a lot of different tools, and make that work in a way that's going to help your team and help your customers. Okay, so hopefully with all of this, you can sense a theme. And it's a pretty simple theme. You need to measure, experiment, measure, and repeat. And you just need to do that over and over and over again. And if like automations, they're just like performance issues, maybe you've worked with a junior dev who you ask to do some sort of performance issue, and like they look at the code and they say, I think that it's inefficient in this area, right? And like your red flags are flying off the shelf because you realize like that's not how you understand a performance problem. You measure it, and then you look and you go, oh, it looks like that's the area that's slow, and you try something and you push that change out and you measure it again and you go, turns out I didn't get it. And you do it again, right? And then you say, turns out I did get it, and it was not the thing that the junior developer thought was potentially slow. It's the same with automations. It's the same with the software development flow. We just so happen to be in a place now where we're on that staircase of automations where we can start to do these things. These were really hard to do in the past. It's a lot easier to do now, and we have a lot of best practices and things in place that we can utilize. So it wouldn't be a sponsored talk if I didn't shill my own product at some point. So if you like the way that I'm talking about these things, go check out our Sleuth Automations Marketplace. Obviously, I'm passionate about these things, and so we've built a product that works in very much that same way. It's covering all of those traits. We make it one click so that you can treat it as an experiment. We'll give you the efficacy of the thing based on what you used to be doing and now what you're doing here. And probably most importantly, it's a catalog. It's a catalog of what is the art of possible. And I will remind everybody that not every automation is made for every team. It might not be the right automation for your team. You can try it and see how it fits, see how it feels. I would guarantee that there will be something in there. There will be like 3 to 5 that work for you, and probably 25 that don't. But yeah, take a look, check it out. And as we move into this golden age of automation, maybe that original vision that we had of like developers actually getting to work and code and not having to have distractions and do obnoxious toil, we can get there. We can get a lot closer than we ever could get by embracing automations, the right type of automations, and treating them as a continuous learning and experimentation framework. That's pretty much all I got. If you want to go check out more, you can go download our book. We're up in the boothy thingy, whatever. Come by, have a chat. You can check out the marketplace. Like I say, you don't have to be a Sleuth user to see that. It's just visible for everybody, so you can go browse and see if there's anything that works for you. And if you like it, give us a try or chat to us and tell us why you don't. Either way, that works for us. Kind of quick, but I think we did all right. If anybody has questions, I'd love to talk about it. Yeah?
You mentioned you blocked PRs from being merged. There's an incident, right?
Yep.
So if you're blocking PRs from being merged and there's an incident, presumably someone's creating a PR to fix the incident, how do you work around that one?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think everybody heard that with the mic. So the platforms out there are really nice and flexible, like with the PR checks that they create, and it's kind of an implementation detail. But the way that we deal with it is we will go and put checks on things and then allow you to ignore certain automations and certain guardrails and checks. And the nice thing about that is that it really plays into the efficacy as well. So like there have been ones that we've tried to adopt where we say, we're going to do this all the time, but then we're ignoring it like 30% of the time. And that's smell, right? Like you basically just look at it and go, this is not the right thing for us, or we don't take it seriously enough. But like if you're in an incident, you just go and say, yeah, this one we're going to ignore and send out, make things better. Yep.
So obviously you guys are surfacing some bad news on the sites. How do you prevent a bad culture to be introduced? Managers or higher up executives looking into those dashboards and like penalizing the teams and the individuals who, for some reason, forget to abide the guardrail or, skip the guardrail for some valid reason. That's the culture thing. That how do you guys see that, and what's some recommendations?
Yeah, that's a great question, and we're very opinionated on that. So my opinion and the organization's opinion is that software development is a team sport, and that there are plenty of ways to identify individuals that are like struggling inside of your organization and your culture, but engineering efficiency is not one of them. So the great thing about Dora metrics is that Dora metrics don't focus on the individual, they focus on the team. And they take a sort of zoomed out view of like how you are doing across time. And they take a lot of really hard concepts and boil them down into 4 kind of key numbers. And so when we orient all of these screens and these things, we talk about the team level, we talk about the service level, we don't talk about the individuals. Now, obviously, because we want to give you actionable next steps for what the metrics are showing you, we will show you like, this was deployed by this person and in this time, right? But we're not stack ranking people and saying Joe's the bad one or Joe always ignores a thing. It's more oriented towards your team is performing in this way. And at least what we've discovered is, yes, developers are keenly sensitive to these things, right? And will revolt if you are exposing the wrong kind of thing. But also, if you aren't, they lean in real hard, because they want to do better. They want to be in a culture of continuous learning. They want to be improving all the time. They just don't want you to be measuring them on dumb shit. Any other questions? Yep.
So you had a slide laying out the cost of automation implementation versus payoff. Is it your contention that you are radically changing that slide by just offering a marketplace of automations?
Absolutely, yeah. So I mean that's the thing that we feel like needs to be fixed right now. Like there are tools out there, and like I love a lot of them. Like for instance, GitHub Actions. You can do everything and anything with a GitHub action. However, you need to go figure out what the YAML is. You need to figure out that it's basically they've given you a bunch of individual Lego pieces, And like sometimes Lego sets take hours or days to assemble and a lot of maintenance. And our argument is that we've gotten to a point in time where you can say, hey, I know what a best practice is that involves Slack and PagerDuty and Jira and GitHub, right? And like, it's pretty easy for us to do that orchestration for you. And that will get to the experimentation phase, right? Because that's the key. That's the key to learning. That's the key that's been missing. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I have done this like multiple times in my career. I used to be an engineering manager, and I would take my senior most engineer, and we'd identify a problem in our flow, and I'd say, you've got 2 to 4 weeks to fix this, and he's going off and hitting Slack APIs, and back in the Atlassian days, it was Bamboo and other things that are really brittle, and then like gives us this new process, and we didn't really have any way to measure it, and we already had a sunk cost fallacy, so we were like, that's cool, we'll use it, that's the way to go. We weren't treating it as an experiment, it was a fait accompli. We were like, we've invested, so it must work, it must be the right way to do it. And then we were stuck on this path of endless maintenance as well. So yeah, the real key shift in this day and age is that instantaneous experimentation. Yep.
So is it fair to say that your company is doing this as you and does it have impact in the menu? Like maybe you change the menu when something is not taken off with the customer base or the feedback is bad. I'm just again I'm asking you, are you being similarly scientific method about what you're offering?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And one thing that's really been interesting for us is I always feel like the crowd votes, right? And so we'll show installation count, and it's been really interesting to see certain automations that we thought were pretty impactful, but not that many people have adopted them. And I don't think it hurts. Like I say, there's so many different unique things that every software team does. There's some like really big primitives that we all kind of do, but then there's like a little nuance in every flow. And that means that there are a ton of automations that aren't going to make sense for a ton of people. But then there's like a subset of people that are like, yeah, that's it, right? Like that's how I work, and that will save me a lot of time. So I think the ones that are lower on the menu that are not that popular, it's fine for them to be there as long as it's making life easier for a couple of folks, Got a question over there. She's making you work. Sorry.
So if I'm understanding right, it sounds like these automations are kind of predefined and we can kind of shop, like you said, we might find a few, is the idea of like generative automations where if we're talking about AI, I could kind of describe the context of something and it could help create automations on the fly, like dynamically. Has that been explored at all?
I love that. I mean, we are currently experimenting with what we can do with AI, and in specifically the context of the automations, because we feel like we can be a little more loosey-goosey with those, like you can either adopt it or not. We haven't tried that, which sounds actually really cool. I'll talk to my CTO about that. One thing I will say is that we've built a really powerful framework underneath with all the little Lego blocks. So just like GitHub Actions gives you, you can have a YAML where you describe all of these things. What we've done is just say, look, these are blueprints or recipes that we think make a lot of sense. But then the marketplace also allows you to just dump a custom YAML in there. So you can see the YAML of this one, and maybe the action of this is to send a Slack notification, and instead you want the same sort of path, but the last thing you want to do is transition an issue in Jira or like add a comment in Jira. You can take the YAML and just sort of change out that last Lego block and put something custom for yourself. And we see a lot of exciting stuff in the future of that, where we just allow people to say, you were close with that blueprint, but I like this better. And that's where some exciting things can start to show up.
Thank you for your presentation. Yeah. I was, am I loud?
No, you're doing great.
Now I'm good, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so my question is, your product, how is this product get integrated into an existing workflow? What I was expecting is that you may show a workflow, for example, in Azure DevOps pipeline, for example, and then you integrate, show how your product would integrate and how the workflow would look like afterwards, so that we have an like understanding of how an existing application or an existing pipeline would actually get impacted by your system or your product offering. And the second thing is SDK, if there are SDK available for expansion points.
Yeah, okay, first question first. It's interesting because I mean, obviously there's so much automation in a CI/CD pipeline, right? Now, what we're trying to argue is that there's a ton of great tools out there that do that. You know, like, so we use Circle CI. I know other people use GitHub Actions or Harness or whatever it is. There's a lot of ability to do the thing that you need to get bits from one place to the next. Now, where there is a gap is the sort of software development lifecycle, where you're saying it could be something all the way from like, I create something in Figma, and I want that event to trigger something that's going to happen over here in my wiki, right? Because that's important to optimize the flow. And so we're focused a lot more on the automation of like those higher level flows and like gluing those systems together than like on the CI/CD pipeline. So in the example of the Slack-based approvals, that approval's happening in Circle CI, right? Because Circle CI has a step, and we could go into the Circle CI UI. I mean, I love Circle, but I don't love their UI. And we could press approve there, right? But what is much better for our developers is to keep them in Slack, right? And to have them like only have to pay attention when the moment is right, not to have to go keep monitoring this pipeline, instead to get, you know, mentioned in Slack, and they go, oh yeah, no, that one's totally fine, thumbs up, right? And they thumbs up, and that's the interface. But what that means is we're going off and hitting the Circle CI API, you know, so the workflow is still defined in that way. We're just orchestrating some of the bits around that. And then your second question, remind me.
How can do you also offer SDK for extension points?
Right. Yes. So I mean, everything has like a GraphQL interface so that you can modify stuff. The thing that I will say about the automations itself, it's currently through that YAML mechanism, and so you can define that in the UI. You can define that either via YAML file in your repository as well. And I don't know if there's a GraphQL modification to add one of those automations just yet, but it's coming in the next couple weeks if it's not there. So, any other questions? All right, well, thank you all so much. I really appreciate it.